Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. We're back again. We're going to work today on a Shimano saltwater reel. It was an introductory level reel. You don't see them making too many introductory reels from Shimano anymore. They've really focused on their higher end products. But this is a graphite one. It was probably from the 1990s, early 2000s. It's a Shimano AX500S. It's a bigger reel, and it's certainly a surf caster and drop fishing, but a high capacity reel. It's a little bit dirty. It came to me in one of these flea market finds. It's the AX version, and it's a solid, dependable reel, not a daily fisher. If you were fishing out there every day, you probably would want something a little bit more robust, but for the occasional angler or the guy who's got a cabin down at the lake or the shore and just wants a pole to go out every now and then and do some jig fishing or drop fishing, this is a good reel for that. It's got a capacity of, let's see, 250 yards, a 17-pound test, and that's about what this reel was designed for. So let's take it apart, show you how to service it. I've mentioned this before, even if it's an entry-level reel, it still requires annual maintenance. And you want to make sure that you keep it in the best operating condition possible so that it doesn't fail you when you get that strike. You want to take off monofilament. You saw me clip a little line there. You take off the monofilament on an annual basis so that you're not fishing with old line. It's going to break off in the next season. And monofilament's cheap, so don't try to save yourself and in the end find that it was the wrong thing to do. So we're going to start by removing the exterior parts. That includes the spool and the drag tensioner. There's some dirt up top here. I'm just going to use a little bit of, in this case, Purple Power. It's a little bit of a degreaser, and a paper towel. We'll just get that off. That'll clean it up pretty good. Doesn't take much. We'll go into the drags afterwards, but for now I just want to get that surface level of dust and dirt off. You know, the top of the drag reels, especially in saltwater fishing, they're the ones that take the brunt of all of the water and the corrosion and the like, because that's where the line keeps coming in and out of, so it'll bounce off the top of the spool. Alright, that spool we'll save the drag surface for. I'm going to pull the little tensioner and shim washers off of here. These shim washers control the level of the wind on a reel. So if you find your line is bunching to the top or the bottom, it means that you need to either add or remove one of these washers. But this one seemed to be spooling fine before I pulled the washers from the line, the monofilament from the spool. So that's I'm just going to leave them right where they are there. This one has a little bit of a pressed-on click rotor. You can just work it off with the pliers, typically. In this case, I'm just going to leave it. We'll get it from underneath. Okay, there's two ways you got to look at these handles. If you see that the opposite side screw is turning, that means you have a through shaft and you have to remove this side cap. It's always a good practice to remove that side cap regardless, because some of the older version reels, and even some of the newer ones like an Okuma or an Auto, for example, they're hiding a screw under that cap. So they're not all through threaded, but know the ones that are. All right, we have 1, 2, 5 of these side plate screws. I'm going to take them out and I'm going to lay them on the table. And the reason I do that is make sure that they're all the same size. If you find that one or the other of these is longer or shorter, you want to note where they came from. And while we're doing that, we might as well have my my standard disclaimer kind of stuff. I wear a protective glove, as you'll notice on my hand here. The reason for doing that is to keep the chemicals that are inside of reels off my hand if possible. I also use a parts tray. You've seen me put a couple of pieces and parts into that parts tray there. That's to keep them all in a centralized place so that when I go to reinstall, I find them easily. And then the last part is I take pictures along the way. In this case, I'm taking a video. But if you don't want to take a video, just take snapshots, use your cell phone, use a digital camera, use whatever. And just at crucial junctures, or you think you're going to need a picture in case you forget how to reinstall, or you forget the particular configuration of something, then you want to go ahead and take a picture, because that snapshot is likely to save you some time and effort later on. The 5 screws all are the same size, so I'm going to put those into the parts tray. Now we should be able to pull the side plate off. And for the most part, it's a basic reel. It has one ball bearing that's going to be up here. We'll get to that. And for the other parts, it's just plastic bushing, so it's an economy reel. You're not seeing a bearing or a brass bushing there. You're seeing basically the lowest cost element, but that doesn't mean it makes it a bad reel. It just makes it a value reel. And again, if you're just using this on an occasional basis, you're not going to wear those plastic bushings out, so don't worry about it. It's all to fit your needs. Again, as I said, if you're going to fish this thing every day and put it through some heavy lifting, so to speak, then sure, you want to make sure you have maybe, people ask me on bearings, I say usually 3, one up top and one on each side of the main gear is probably the minimum you would want if you're a heavy fisher. But again, if this is something that's only going to be used occasionally, you don't need that. All right, I just pulled the axle out this way rather than pulling this click ratchet off. I did that by removing the little set screw from the crosswind block. Now we can remove the main gear. And this is suffering from just being dried out. We can see that. There's nothing here. I mean, everything looks like it came out of the factory without any kind of grease. And so this service really is just about relubing, cleaning up any dried grease along the way. There's a little bit accumulated on this anti-reverse override here. So let's just get that off. The grease is clean, so I would say to me that it really hasn't been used much. You can see it's not dirty or black or gummed up in any regard. It's just probably just been leveled out here. And then the last thing we're going to do is take off this rotor so we can service the bearing. There's one set screw. Put that in my tray. I'm going to leave these 3 parts here because they'll be the first ones that go back in. And then we have a rotor cap nut here holding the rotor on. Put that into my tray, take the rotor off, and this is old school in terms of the anti-reverse. We have a spring holding on a dog. You can, if we take this off, you can see it a little bit better. There's a tail of the spring here, and then it wraps around the pivot point and over to this side. You have a little bit of a trip lever here underneath. Take that off for now. Now, this click ratchet has a little tag here. That's going to go inside this plastic band. So if you've taken one of these off and you're viewing the video because you're kind of stuck in terms of why it's not working the way it should, note that there's a hole inside this carrier and that there's a little spring here, and that little spring, when you go to put it back on, is going to go that way only on the other side of this. Okay, and now I got a bearing under here. I'm not going to take the bearing out. There's no need to do that for a basic service. If this was all gummed up and junky and the like, yeah, you would want to do that. But for now, just a good squirt of the oil on that bearing. And also come on it from the other side. And you could say I'm being lazy, but there's real no need to do that. Okay, so to reinstall after you've oiled that, turn your click ratchet upside down for the anti-reverse. Find the side that has the hole in it, which is this side. Slip it over the top of the groove, and then make sure that that little metal spring arm is inside that carrier's hole. Once you do that, then you can just center it on the shaft. So once you've reinstalled the spring, then you can reattach the carrier, and you can make sure that all of this is done. Now, to reattach that carrier, leave that anti-reverse in the off position, and then once you go to reattach, slip it in there, then you can make sure that it's working properly. Okay, with that, then we can put the rotor on. Grab the tie down or the hold down nut for the rotor. Make sure it threads properly. Don't go cross-stripping this thing. It'll be a nightmare. Okay, I apologize for that break. As typical of me, I just dropped something on the floor. Okay, so once you tighten that down, go get your screw here. It's a little catch screw that's going to hold the rotor nut from turning. So get that in there so that it's properly set. Give it a turn. There you go. Look at that. That's a nice reaction. All right, let's go over then and reassemble the rest of the reel. Then we'll start with the crosswind block. You want to grab a little bit of grease, put some on the back, get some in the teeth, check those teeth, make sure that they're all uniform, put some on the face here, get that set up down below. That's the crosswind gear. Now we'll take the crosswind block, we'll do the same thing here, we'll load that up with some grease in the channels. Make sure we get grease onto the face of that crosswind gear. Slip that tongue of that block underneath the trailing arm there, the override for the anti-reverse. Let's come up top and put some grease onto the pinion gear there. And then let's get that main gear. Do the same thing here. Grab some grease, make sure that the channels of the teeth, get some grease in them. Now you don't have to get every tooth, but do enough, because the smaller gear on the one will drive the bigger gear on the other. Check the back here, make sure that you can make sure all the teeth are uniform on that drive, and then put a little bit into the one that's going to go inside that bushing. Then we can reinstall here. Okay, next up then is to grab the axle shaft. You want to get a little bit on there. Don't go crazy with the grease on this, because the hole inside the pinion gear here will just take any excess and just kind of glob it up top there. So just put that back in right. And then load from below so that you can see that you have the hole set for the screw. This one I always get trouble with, so I'll apologize in advance if I drop it a couple of times. I'm going to put a little bit of grease on there just to kind of hold the screw while I get it started. I think we actually got some success there the first time around here. So let's get this in tight. Now at this point we can test just to make sure all the gears are turning properly. Don't go crazy with it because it's still in a little bit of a condition because this side's not being held. When you go to this side now, since we disassembled, I want to make sure you've got tabs on this bushing. Make sure the tabs get inside the case, otherwise your case is not going to close properly. That's why I took this off the main gear and I put it back in here, probably when we were just off searching for that screw. But make sure that that's flush. You can put a little bit of grease onto the center shaft of the main gear. Then you can reinstall the side plate. And we've got the 5 screws here. They're in my case here, so it's kind of telling me where that belongs. One more. Now, folks ask me on this, can they use a mechanical screwdriver? My recommendation generally is don't do that. Particularly, I mean, this is a graphite case. You can over torque these things. Those mechanical screwdrivers tend to have an awful lot of torque on them. And if you over torque, you can cause a bind, or you can cause, if it's a plastic case, more so than a graphite, you can cause the case to actually shatter. You don't need to do that. If you don't have the hand strength, leave the screw a little bit short of the final tightening and then go in and just do the last bit by hand if you need to, but don't rely on that mechanical screwdriver too much. So what am I talking about? You'll see here, I'll leave one a little bit proud. So I don't mind if this part of it is by mechanical screwdriver, but when you get to about this point here, 1 or 2 turns left, then stop your mechanical screwdriver and finish it with a hand tool if possible. And if you can't, if you need that mechanical screwdriver the whole way, then I would say be very, very gentle as that last piece of the set there, so that you don't over torque. Okay, that should be the base of the reel now. We should be able to install the handle next. Again, that had a through screw. And then we have the back side. There's a little square notch there. Make sure that gets into the the whole of the main gear. This has a collapsible handle for storage. You can collapse it down if you wanted to. For use, you want to make sure that this is all tight. Give it a crank to make sure, oh boy, did that clean up nicely. And then just to make sure you have the reverse override, flip the switch, make sure that anti-reverse ride is there, and then that it's working properly on the outside. Quickly on the main spool then, there's gear, there's drags inside here. I was mentioning before, this takes the brunt of the abuse in saltwater and casting environments, so make sure you clean up your drags, or at least check them to make sure that the channels are okay. These have Teflon drags in them, so there's nothing you need to do with these other than make sure that they're clean. I use a cotton swab most of the time just to get any kind of junk that may be in the channel out of that channel. And then here's your sequence then. So you have the bottom of the channel, and you have a let's get this off of here. This one's a little stuck. And then this would be your sequence then. So you have the Teflon first, and you have the round keyed washer. Just make sure they're clean. I'm just feeling for any kind of debris on those. Then you have the eared washer. Then you have the last of the hard washers. And you have the last of this. This has got a little bit of sand or something on it, I'm feeling. That's the top washer. That probably would be why. Make sure they're all in the channel, and then this clip is a spring, so be careful as you reload. If you have a part that's not the two indentations to set that first piece, and then just snap it in place. There's a groove that it rides in, that's what it's doing there. Back on with the spool then. And the adjuster knob. Tighten it down. Make sure that you've got the click working, which is nice. That tells you that the fish is spooling outward. There we go. Now we're nice and tight. All right. There we go. That's the Shimano. It's the AX500S. It's a nice single ball bearing reel. As we mentioned, it's a great one for the occasional angler. It's a heavy duty reel in that it's probably designed for deep lake and saltwater fishing. It's an older reel. It's got the graphite case and spool, and this one's going to go a long time, and that's all you have to do. Just some simple maintenance on that on a once a year basis. Make sure that it's got the lubrication it needs to perform properly. And just as an aside, everybody always asks me about this. You can put a drop of oil into the side. Well, you don't even have to put one there. That's just a metal holder. Just put some into the side. If this was a roller bearing, you could put oil onto that. And just a couple of flips just to work it in. But this one was working fine, so there was no real need to go crazy with that. Okay, so that's it. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. I appreciate you watching. Please subscribe if you like these. I do these on a regular basis, and you'll see more of the reels that come into my shop. Thank you again. Have a great day.